A flight attendant refuses to serve an elderly couple. But when she finds out who they really are, everything changes. What happens next will shock you. Before we start the story, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe for more. It was a busy morning at the airport, and the flight from New York to Miami was nearly full. As passengers boarded the plane, a quiet elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, shuffled down the aisle. They weren't in a hurry and didn't seem to be bothered by the usual chaos of a packed flight. Mr. Thompson, with his gray hair and glasses perched on the edge of his nose, carefully adjusted his bag, while Mrs. Thompson, who seemed frail but still sharp, smiled politely at the flight attendants as she settled into her seat. There was nothing remarkable about them, just an ordinary couple traveling to see their grandchildren in Florida. But what happened next would leave everyone on the plane shocked. Sarah, the flight attendant, was making her rounds, offering drinks and snacks to passengers. She was in a bit of a rush. This was a full flight, and there were always a million things to do. When she reached the Thompsons' row, she noticed that Mrs. Thompson was squinting at the menu, clearly trying to figure out what she wanted to drink. Sarah, who had been working on this flight route for years, didn't think much of it at first. But as she looked closer, something about the couple rubbed her the wrong way. Maybe it was their calm demeanor, their polite smiles. It just didn't match the energy of the younger, more demanding passengers she was used to. Something inside her clicked. She thought they were being a bit too slow, maybe even trying to get something extra for free. She had seen it before, passengers who seemed to take advantage of the system, asking for more than they were entitled to, or making a fuss when they didn't get exactly what they wanted. Without thinking much more about it, Sarah spoke sharply. "I'm afraid we don't have time to serve your request right now. We have other passengers to take care of first." The words left her mouth before she could stop them. She hadn't meant to sound rude, but it came out that way. Mrs. Thompson's smile faltered, and she looked at her husband, unsure of what had just happened. Mr. Thompson, who had been quiet up until that point, simply nodded. He didn't argue. Sarah turned away, feeling a little irritated that they hadn't moved faster with their choices. She didn't give them another glance as she continued down the aisle, already thinking about the next task ahead. She had no idea who she had just dismissed so coldly, nor what consequences that simple decision would bring. As the flight progressed, Sarah was focused on her duties, making sure everyone was comfortable and the cabin was running smoothly. The usual sounds of in-flight chatter, the hum of the plane's engines, and the occasional request for another drink or snack filled the air. But something about the Thompsons kept nagging at her. It wasn't just their quiet nature or the way they had accepted her refusal without any argument. There was a subtle tension she couldn't shake. Every time she passed by their seats, she couldn't help but notice how they sat there, calm and patient, as though they were waiting for something. Sarah didn't give it much thought at first. She had a job to do, and there were plenty of other passengers to attend to. But the more she worked, the more she felt a strange weight in the back of her mind. Maybe she had been too harsh with them, but at the same time, she didn't think they deserved any special treatment. After all, she had seen many passengers act entitled, demanding things they didn't deserve, making her job harder than it already was. It wasn't until later that the situation took a strange turn. About an hour into the flight, as Sarah was finishing up the last of her rounds, the captain made a sudden announcement over the intercom, asking Sarah to come to the front of the plane. The urgency in his voice was something she didn't normally hear, especially during a routine flight. Confused but not questioning it, she quickly made her way to the cockpit, wondering if there had been a problem with the aircraft or something else serious. When she entered the galley, her manager was waiting for her. He had a serious look on his face, and for a moment Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She thought maybe something had gone wrong with the flight, or perhaps there was a passenger complaint. But instead, her manager handed her a phone and said, "You need to take this call. It's from the captain." Sarah took the phone, trying to hide the nerves creeping up her spine. The voice on the other end was calm, but the words were anything but ordinary. "We need to talk about the couple in seat 14B and 14C, the captain began. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, they're not just any passengers on this flight. You need to know who they are before you continue with your duties." At first, Sarah was puzzled. What did they have to do with anything? Why was the captain so insistent about them? She thought back to the interaction she had with them earlier, the quiet couple who had asked for a drink and been refused without hesitation. She didn't understand what was so special about them. But the captain's next words sent a chill down her spine. "They're major shareholders in this airline. They're important people. You need to treat them with the utmost respect." The phone call ended abruptly, leaving Sarah standing there in shock. The truth hit her like a slap to the face. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, the couple she had dismissed so callously, were far from ordinary passengers. They were VIP shareholders of the airline, well-known figures in the business world. Not only that, but they were also generous investors in multiple charities supported by the airline. This wasn't just a mistake on Sarah's part. It was a monumental error in judgment. She could hardly believe it. Sarah's heart raced as she stood in the galley, trying to process what the captain had just told her. The Thompsons weren't just any passengers. They were powerful, influential people who had helped shape the very airline she worked for. She felt a sickening sense of guilt wash over her. She had refused to serve them, assuming they were just another pair of elderly passengers trying to get something for free. But now, she realized the magnitude of her mistake. The situation wasn't just uncomfortable. It could cost her more than her job. She rushed back to her seat, her mind spinning. She had to find a way to make it right, but the thought of confronting the Thompsons now made her feel even more nervous. What if they were already upset with her? What if they had already told the manager or the captain what had happened? She couldn't face them. Not like this. The longer she waited, the more anxious she became. As she walked down the aisle again, she glanced nervously at the couple. They were still sitting quietly, reading their books, completely unaware of the chaos that had just unfolded behind the scenes. Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of embarrassment. She knew she couldn't just ignore them, but what could she possibly say to make up for her mistake? She hesitated before approaching their row. Her palms were sweating, and she struggled to find the right words. What could she say that wouldn't make the situation worse? She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, before finally stopping at their seats. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," she said, her voice faltering slightly. "I want to sincerely apologize for how I treated you earlier. I was wrong to assume anything about you, and I deeply regret my actions. Please let me make it up to you. Can I get you anything? Anything at all?" The Thompsons looked up from their books, their faces calm, though they clearly noticed the change in Sarah's tone. Mrs. Thompson smiled politely, her eyes soft but still a bit distant, as if she was unsure how to respond. Mr. Thompson, however, just nodded slowly. There was no anger in his eyes, just a quiet understanding. "We understand, dear," Mr. Thompson said in a gentle voice. "No harm done. We appreciate your apology." But Sarah could see the subtle hint of disappointment in his eyes, a look she couldn't quite shake. They weren't angry, but there was something far more unsettling about their reaction. The realization hit her again like a punch to the gut. She hadn't just insulted a couple of elderly passengers. She had treated two people who had invested millions into this airline with complete disregard. She stood there for a moment, feeling completely out of place. They weren't acting like she had expected, demanding an apology or making a scene. Instead, they were calm, collected, and kind. Almost too kind, as if they had been through moments like this before and knew how to handle it without making a fuss. Sarah, on the other hand, was the one who felt like she had made a mess of everything. She apologized again, but she knew that words could never fully erase what had happened. What she had done couldn't be undone. The damage was already done, and now she would have to live with it. As she walked away, she couldn't help but wonder how this would all play out. Would the Thompsons tell the higher-ups about her treatment? Would they tell others? Would her mistake follow her forever? All these questions buzzed in her mind as the flight continued, and she realized with a heavy heart that she had no idea what the consequences of her actions might be. As the flight continued, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her chest. She went about her duties mechanically, offering drinks, snacks, and checking on the other passengers. But her mind was constantly on the Thompsons. The cabin was full, the chatter and noise of the flight continued around her, but her thoughts kept drifting back to that moment, when she had turned her back on them, assuming they were just another couple of passengers. She glanced at the Thompsons' row again. They were still sitting quietly, their heads bent over their books, completely at ease, as though nothing had happened. The calmness of their presence made Sarah feel even more unsettled. It was as if they were waiting for something, but Sarah couldn't figure out what. She imagined that they must have been talking about her in private, perhaps deciding how to respond, but the longer she watched, the more she realized that they didn't seem bothered at all. It was almost as if they had expected something like this to happen. The thought was chilling. Despite her nervousness, Sarah couldn't help but feel a small sense of relief. Maybe they had already forgiven her. Maybe they wouldn't make a big deal out of it. But as the flight wore on, Sarah's mind kept racing. Her manager had made it clear that there was something important about the Thompsons, but he hadn't said much more than that. She couldn't help but wonder just how important they were. Could they really be as influential as the captain had implied? And if they were, what did that mean for her? The rest of the flight passed in a blur, but Sarah's mind wouldn't let go of the situation. She tried to focus on her tasks, but the pressure of the unknown weighed heavily on her. She had made a mistake, and now she was paying for it. But how much would it cost her? Would the Thompsons report her? Would they even bother? She couldn't figure it out. By the time the plane began its descent into Miami, Sarah's stomach was in knots. She couldn't relax, couldn't stop thinking about the possible fallout. As she moved up and down the aisles collecting trash and making final announcements, she kept an eye on the Thompsons, who had finally closed their books and were preparing for landing. They seemed perfectly content, almost detached from the chaos that had unfolded earlier. It was then that Sarah noticed something else. As she moved toward the front of the plane, she saw the manager speaking with a couple of passengers near the cockpit. He was laughing, joking around with them as if they were old friends. But as he turned toward Sarah, his smile faded. He walked over to her quickly, his expression suddenly serious again. "Sarah," he said in a low voice, "can you come with me for a moment? We need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. She followed him nervously down the aisle, her mind racing. As they reached the galley, the manager's face remained unreadable. He handed her a piece of paper with a number written on it. "This is the number for the Customer Relations Department. You need to make a formal apology to Mr. and Mrs. Thompson as soon as we land." Sarah blinked in confusion. "Wait, I already apologized to them," she said, her voice shaking. "I spoke with them earlier." The manager cut her off, his voice firm. "That's not the issue, Sarah. They weren't upset with you, but they expect a higher level of service than what you provided today. They're used to first-class treatment. They're VIP shareholders. They're important." Sarah's stomach dropped. It hit her again. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson weren't just ordinary passengers. She was dealing with people who could affect her career, people who had invested millions into the airline. She felt a lump rise in her throat. This wasn't just about a mistake anymore. It was about how her actions might have impacted the airline's reputation, and how easily she had underestimated these two quiet, unassuming individuals. "You'll need to call them as soon as we land," the manager continued, his voice cold. "We don't want any bad press, and we certainly don't want them spreading word of your treatment. Understood?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. She had gone from feeling confident in her job to suddenly realizing how little she knew about the people she interacted with every day. She had no idea who the Thompsons really were, and now she would have to face the consequences of that ignorance. The flight was nearly over, and the reality of what she had done was beginning to settle in. There was no going back. As the plane touched down in Miami, Sarah's nerves were on edge. The familiar sounds of the plane's wheels hitting the tarmac and the gradual deceleration. only seemed to heighten her anxiety. She had never felt so out of place on a flight before. The usual post-landing chaos, passengers retrieving their bags from overhead bins, the sound of seatbelt signs clicking off, was a blur to her. All she could think about was the conversation she'd just had with her manager and the looming task ahead of her. The moment the plane came to a full stop and the seatbelt sign was switched off, Sarah quickly gathered her belongings. Her hands were clammy, her mind still racing, and she walked with purpose toward the front of the plane, trying to avoid eye contact with anyone, but especially the Thompsons. She couldn't face them again. Not yet. She had done enough damage for one day. She needed to sort this out, and quickly. As she made her way to the terminal, she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. The airport was busy, and she tried to blend in with the crowd, but her mind was still focused on one thing: how to handle the call to the Thompsons. She kept playing the conversation over and over in her head. What should she say? What could she say that would make up for her earlier behavior? The reality was, nothing could undo the first impression she had given them, but she had to try. For her career, for her reputation, she had to make this right. She entered the staff area and found a quiet corner, taking out her phone. The number her manager had given her was still in her hand, the digits almost mocking her as she stared at them. With a deep breath, she dialed the number, her hands trembling as the phone rang. The longer it took for someone to pick up, the worse the anxiety built up inside her. Finally, a voice on the other end answered. "Hello, this is Rachel from Customer Relations. How may I assist you?" "Hi, Rachel," Sarah said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "This is Sarah, a flight attendant on Flight 478. I need to speak with Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. Her voice faltered for a moment. "I need to apologize for a misunderstanding that occurred during the flight." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Rachel responded. "I see. I'll patch you through to them now. Please hold." Sarah's stomach dropped. She was about to speak directly to the Thompsons, the very people she had so rudely dismissed earlier. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to hang up and avoid the situation altogether, but she knew there was no running from it. She had to face the consequences of her actions. After what felt like an eternity, the phone clicked, and a calm voice came on the line. "This is Mr. Thompson. Who's calling?" "Mr. Thompson, my name is Sarah. I'm a flight attendant from your flight earlier today. I just wanted to reach out and offer my sincerest apologies for the way I treated you and your wife. I was completely wrong in how I handled the situation, and I deeply regret my actions. Please allow me to make it right. I understand that this should have been a much more respectful interaction, and I truly hope you can accept my apology." There was a long pause on the other end. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she waited for a response. Had she overstepped? Would they hang up on her? Her hands shook as she held the phone tightly, praying for some sign that her apology was enough. After what felt like an agonizing silence, Mr. Thompson's voice finally broke through. "Sarah," he said, his tone kind but firm. "We appreciate your apology. We understand that mistakes happen. But I think it's important for you to realize that how you treat people, even those who seem unimportant, can have lasting consequences. It's not just about the mistake you made, but how you learn from it." Sarah felt the weight of his words settle heavily on her chest. It wasn't just about the apology. It was about the lesson she had to take away from this. She had treated them with dismissiveness and disrespect, assuming they were just like any other couple. But now she understood how wrong she had been. And it wasn't just about Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. It was a lesson for everyone she interacted with in the future. She had learned the hard way that respect didn't depend on appearances or status. It was something that needed to be given to everyone, regardless of who they were. "We'll accept your apology," Mr. Thompson continued. "But I do hope you'll think twice next time before making assumptions about people. We all deserve the same level of respect." The call ended shortly after, and Sarah was left standing there, staring at her phone. She was relieved, but at the same time, she couldn't shake the discomfort she felt. The Thompsons hadn't been angry. They hadn't made a fuss or demanded anything in return. Instead, they had given her a lesson in humility and respect, one that she wouldn't soon forget. As she sat down, reflecting on the conversation, she realized that this experience wasn't just a wake-up call about how to treat others. It was also a reminder of how easy it was to overlook the most important people in our lives, simply because we couldn't see their worth on the surface. The Thompsons might have been elderly and quiet, but they had a world of influence, and they had shown her kindness and grace in a way she would never have expected. This wasn't over yet, Sarah realized. The lesson had just begun. The days following the flight were a blur for Sarah. Despite the Thompsons' calm and kind response, she couldn't stop replaying the events over and over in her mind. She kept thinking about how easily she had judged them, how, in a split second, she had made an assumption that turned out to be completely wrong. The weight of that mistake hung over her like a dark cloud, and no matter how hard she tried to push it out of her mind, it kept coming back. It wasn't just about the mistake, it was about how she'd allowed herself to fall into a trap of prejudice and quick judgment, something she had always prided herself on avoiding. Sarah went through her routine, serving drinks and interacting with passengers, but her usual confidence was gone. She found herself second-guessing every interaction, worrying if she was unknowingly making another mistake. She had been humbled, yes, but at what cost? The reality of the situation kept sinking in. The Thompsons weren't just any influential passengers. They were shareholders in the airline, people who had invested their time and money into building what she had come to see as a simple job. They were the ones who helped keep flights like hers running smoothly, who were likely responsible for the training, the equipment, and even the salaries of flight attendants like her. And she had treated them as if they were nothing more than a nuisance on a crowded flight. That thought made her stomach churn. How many others had she brushed off without knowing who they really were? How many people had she underestimated because they didn't fit into the mold she had created for herself of who deserved respect and attention? A few days after the flight, Sarah was called into a meeting with her supervisor, the one who had first told her about the Thompsons' true status. Her palms were sweaty as she walked into the office. She had expected this conversation, but she still felt the dread building in her chest. The supervisor, a no-nonsense woman named Linda, didn't waste any time. "Sarah, I've heard from the Thompsons. They've mentioned your apology and how you handled the situation afterward. I'm going to be honest with you. Their feedback wasn't negative, but it could have been. They could have easily escalated the situation to corporate, but they didn't. Instead, they've chosen to move forward without making a big deal out of it." Sarah sat in stunned silence. She had been bracing herself for a formal reprimand, maybe even a written warning, but instead, Linda's tone was almost reassuring. "They understand mistakes happen, and they were willing to let it slide. But Sarah, this is a reminder that even small actions can have huge consequences. Your assumption about them could have cost us a lot more than just a little embarrassment. It could have been a public relations nightmare for the airline. You need to be more aware of who you're dealing with and how your actions reflect on the company." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of Linda's words. She had been given a second chance, but that didn't mean it was without consequences. Linda didn't mention any formal punishment, but Sarah understood the gravity of the situation. This was a test to see how she would handle the lesson she had been given. Would she learn from it and improve, or would she let her pride get in the way? "The Thompsons didn't ask for anything extra," Linda continued, "but they did mention one thing that caught my attention. They said you were genuinely remorseful for your actions. That's important. They were impressed by your willingness to own up to your mistake and make things right. You've earned some points there, but this is your chance to prove that you can carry that humility forward." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to process it all. She had never been so close to losing her job. It was humbling, to say the least, to realize how easily things could have gone south. She hadn't just embarrassed herself, she had almost embarrassed the entire airline. But now, there was an opportunity to prove that she could rise above it, learn from her mistakes, and become a better flight attendant, not just for herself, but for the company that had entrusted her with such an important role. After the meeting, Sarah spent the rest of the day thinking about how she could show the Thompsons and her supervisor that she had learned something from the whole experience. She needed to prove to herself that she was capable of growing, that she wasn't defined by one mistake, but by how she responded to it. The next morning, Sarah sat down at her desk and drafted an email to Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. It wasn't a grand gesture or anything extravagant, but she felt it was important to continue what she had started, her apology, her regret, and her desire to make things right. The email was simple, but it came from the heart. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I wanted to take a moment to thank you again for your understanding and kindness during our recent flight. I realize that I made a grave error in judgment when I dismissed you, and I deeply regret that I allowed my assumptions to cloud my actions. Your generosity, both to the airline and the community, is something I now recognize and respect. I want to assure you that I have taken this lesson to heart, and I will work harder to ensure that I treat every passenger with the respect they deserve, no matter who they are. Thank you for showing me that sometimes a simple act of kindness can have a lasting impact. Sincerely, Sarah. Sarah sat back and reread the email, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in days. She clicked send, knowing that she had done everything she could to make things right. It wasn't about expecting forgiveness or seeking approval. It was about making sure that the same mistake never happened again. As she hit send, Sarah realized that the lesson had finally clicked. The Thompsons had taught her something far more valuable than any training session ever could. It wasn't just about following the rules or doing your job well. It was about understanding the human side of the job, the people behind the uniforms and the titles. It was about humility, respect, and never taking anyone for granted. For the first time in days, Sarah felt the weight on her chest lift, and she knew that this experience, no matter how uncomfortable, would shape her for the better. The road to recovery wasn't immediate, but Sarah was determined to walk it with her head held high. She had learned from her mistake, and that in itself was something worth holding on to. The days after Sarah sent her email to the Thompsons were filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. She had made her apology, and now she could only wait. She couldn't be sure whether the Thompsons would even respond, or if they would simply let the matter fade into the background. But in some ways, that uncertainty felt like a weight lifted off her shoulders. She had done all she could to make things right. Now it was up to them. Work continued as usual for Sarah, but she noticed a shift in her approach to her job. Every passenger, no matter how quiet or unassuming, received her full attention. She made a conscious effort to smile more, to engage with passengers in a way that felt genuine, not rushed or impatient. She realized that, as a flight attendant, her job wasn't just about getting through the flight. It was about creating an experience, making people feel seen, heard, and valued. It wasn't always easy, especially when the days were long and the flights felt endless, but Sarah was determined to change her mindset. One afternoon, a few days after sending the email, Sarah was standing at the gate preparing for another flight when she saw a familiar face. It was Mrs. Thompson, walking through the terminal with a small suitcase in tow. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Mrs. Thompson hadn't said much when they spoke on the phone, and now here she was, in person again. There was no escaping the situation now. Sarah took a deep breath, stepping forward to greet her. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, trying to sound as calm as possible. "It's good to see you again. I just wanted to thank you once more for your understanding." Mrs. Thompson smiled warmly, her eyes gentle. "You don't need to keep apologizing, Sarah," she said, her voice soft. "We all make mistakes. What matters is that you recognized it, and that you took the time to correct it." Sarah's heart fluttered at the kindness in Mrs. Thompson's words. She had expected something more, maybe a pointed comment or a cold shoulder, but instead, she was met with warmth and compassion. It was clear that the Thompsons weren't interested in holding a grudge. They had forgiven her, and in doing so, they had taught her something more important than any lesson she could have learned in a training session or a book. But I still feel like I owe you an apology in person, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. It wasn't right the way I treated you, and I want you to know that I've learned from it. I'll never make that mistake again. Mrs. Thompson patted Sarah's arm kindly. I believe you, she said, and that's what matters most. We can all grow, Sarah. You've taken the first step in learning how to treat others with the respect they deserve, and that's something worth acknowledging. Not everyone is willing to do that. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. The weight of the last few days, the guilt, the self-doubt, the fear of what the Thompsons might do, was starting to fade. Mrs. Thompson's words felt like the final piece of a puzzle that had been rattling around in Sarah's mind for days. It wasn't about trying to erase her mistake or hoping for forgiveness. It was about acknowledging her fault, learning from it, and using it to become better at her job and as a person. Mrs. Thompson wasn't offering her forgiveness as a form of pity. She was offering it as a reminder that mistakes were part of the process, and it was how you responded to them that defined you. Thank you, Sarah said softly, the words barely escaping her lips. You've helped me more than you know. As they stood there in the terminal, the bustling noise of the airport all around them, Sarah realized something profound. This moment, this simple exchange between two strangers who had become connected by a single misstep, had taught her one of the most important lessons of her life. It wasn't just about apologizing when you were wrong. It was about taking accountability and showing others that you were willing to change. It was about how you treated people, especially those you didn't know, and how every action, no matter how small, had an impact. Before Mrs. Thompson left for her gate, she smiled at Sarah one last time, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. Keep doing your best, Sarah. We all have a role to play, and it looks like you're finding yours. With that, Mrs. Thompson walked off toward her gate, leaving Sarah standing in the terminal, feeling a weight lift from her chest. For the first time in days, Sarah felt confident in herself again. She had made a mistake, yes, but she had learned from it. And that, she realized, was all anyone could ask for. The rest of the flight went smoothly. But more than that, it felt different. Sarah felt different. As she served drinks and chatted with passengers, she noticed how much easier it was to connect with them. She no longer rushed through her tasks, no longer took anything for granted. Every interaction felt more meaningful, more intentional. She was learning to value the people around her, no matter who they were or what they looked like. That day, as she walked through the airport after the flight, she finally understood something. It wasn't just the Thompsons who had given her a gift. It was the entire experience, the mistake, the apology, the lesson that had made her a better flight attendant, and she was ready for whatever came next. A week passed, and Sarah continued to reflect on the lessons she had learned. The weight of the mistake she had made was still fresh in her mind, but now it felt like a turning point in her career, one she couldn't ignore. The day-to-day grind of the job, the endless flights, the crowded planes, the same routine, had a different feel now. It was as if her whole perspective had shifted. She was no longer just a flight attendant checking off tasks. She had come to see her role as something much deeper, something that carried more meaning than she had originally understood. It wasn't just about serving drinks, giving safety instructions, and keeping passengers comfortable. It was about human connection, about offering respect to everyone, no matter their background or their appearance. Every passenger had a story, and though she might never know it, her kindness could make a difference in their day. She had learned this the hard way, but now she carried that understanding with her in every interaction, every smile, and every word of reassurance. One afternoon, Sarah was assigned to a long-haul flight, and as she walked down the terminal to board the plane, she spotted a familiar face again. This time, it wasn't Mrs. Thompson, but another older woman who looked lost and confused. She was standing near the gate, her eyes scanning the crowd of passengers who were boarding the flight. Sarah's instinct kicked in, and without a second thought, she approached her. "Excuse me, ma'am. Can I help you with something?" Sarah asked gently, offering her a warm smile. The woman looked up, her face lined with age and concern. "Oh, I think I'm at the wrong gate," she said hesitantly. "I'm looking for my flight to Chicago." Sarah took a moment to check the departure boards. "Actually, this is the right gate for your flight," she reassured her, glancing down at her ticket to confirm. "You're on the right path. Can I help you with anything else? Perhaps find your seat or help you with your bag?" The woman smiled, clearly relieved. "That would be so kind. I'm just not as quick as I used to be," she said with a sheepish laugh. Sarah helped her find her seat, stowing her carry-on luggage in the overhead compartment and offering her a comfortable blanket for the flight. As she did so, Sarah noticed something. The woman was quiet, almost shy, and when Sarah looked into her eyes, she could see a flicker of gratitude, a small, subtle thing, but it was enough to make Sarah's heart feel full. She realized that this simple act of kindness, of taking a moment to assist someone without making them feel like a burden, was far more impactful than any rush to complete her tasks efficiently. When the woman settled into her seat, she looked up at Sarah with a soft smile and said, "Thank you. It's so rare to meet someone who takes the time to help like that. Most people are just too busy." Those words hit Sarah in a way she wasn't expecting. She thought back to the Thompsons, their kindness, their ability to forgive her, and the way they had taught her that small acts of respect went further than she could have imagined. This wasn't just about making up for a mistake anymore. This was about choosing to be different, choosing to see the value in every interaction, no matter how small. As Sarah moved on to the next row, a thought crossed her mind. She hadn't just learned something about how to treat people like the Thompsons. She had learned how to treat everyone with dignity and compassion, regardless of whether they appeared to be important or not. Later during the flight, she had another interaction that deepened her new perspective. A young father with a crying baby was seated in the middle section of the plane, clearly stressed as the baby wailed uncontrollably. Sarah could hear the other passengers shifting in their seats, some sighing impatiently, while others just stared, visibly uncomfortable. Normally, Sarah would have simply done her best to get through the situation, but now, her reaction was different. She saw the father's distress not as an inconvenience, but as a cry for help. She approached his seat, knelt down beside him, and offered a gentle smile. "Is there anything I can do to help? I can bring the baby a bottle or perhaps a snack. It's tough traveling with little ones, I know." The father looked up, surprised by the kindness in her voice. He nodded gratefully, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "I'm so sorry. I've tried everything, but she just won't settle. I feel terrible about bothering everyone." Sarah gave him a reassuring smile. "You're not bothering anyone. I understand how hard it can be. Let me grab something for her." She returned a few minutes later with a bottle of milk and a warm blanket for the baby. She gently spoke to the infant, rocking her softly in her arms for a few minutes. It didn't take long before the baby quieted down, her cries replaced with soft coos. The father, exhausted and overwhelmed, looked up at Sarah with gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he said. "You have no idea how much this helps. I was starting to feel like everyone was judging me." Sarah shook her head. "Don't worry about it, I've been there too. Parenthood is tough, but we're all in this together." It was another small moment, but for Sarah, it was a revelation. She had stopped looking at her job as a list of tasks to complete. She had started seeing the humanity in each situation, in each person she encountered. Whether it was a frail elderly woman needing help with her seat, or a stressed-out father trying to calm his baby, Sarah realized that what people needed most wasn't perfection. They needed understanding. They needed someone who would treat them with kindness, no matter how messy or chaotic the situation was. When the flight landed, Sarah felt a new sense of fulfillment that she hadn't felt before. The day had been long and there were moments of frustration, but there were also moments of connection, moments that made her feel like she was making a real difference, even in the smallest ways. The Thompsons had given her a gift, but it wasn't just about them anymore. It was about every person she interacted with, every day. She didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to be present, kind, and patient. As she walked off the plane that evening, Sarah felt a shift inside her. She was no longer just going through the motions. She was aware in a way she had never been before, and she knew that from this point forward, she would carry this lesson with her wherever she went, on every flight, with every passenger, and with every interaction. It was no longer just about the job, it was about the people she was serving and the respect she showed them in return. This, she realized, was what truly made a great flight attendant. As the weeks passed, Sarah's transformation didn't just stop with her interactions on the plane. She noticed subtle but important changes in her own attitude toward her work, and more importantly, in how she approached life outside of her job. She began to carry the lesson of the Thompsons about humility, respect, and truly seeing people with her in her everyday life. At home, Sarah had always been a bit of a perfectionist. Her apartment was tidy, her schedule meticulously planned, and she held herself to high standards in everything she did. But lately, she'd started to notice something strange. She wasn't getting as frustrated with the small things. She used to get upset over delayed trains, missing a coffee order, or not hitting all her targets for the day. Now, those things seemed less important. What mattered more was how she treated people in the moment, how she made them feel, and how she responded when things didn't go according to plan. One evening, Sarah decided to go out for dinner after a long day of work. She'd been craving something simple, just a quiet meal at her favorite little cafe, a place where the staff knew her by name. She entered the cafe, took her usual seat near the window, and ordered a cup of tea. The server, a young man named James, came over to take her order. He had a tired look in his eyes, as though he'd been dealing with a difficult crowd that evening. As he set the tea on the table, Sarah noticed a slight tremor in his hand. She looked up at him and saw the stress in his eyes. "Is everything okay?" she asked, leaning forward slightly, her voice gentle. It was a simple question, but it was a reflection of her growing desire to connect with others on a deeper level. James hesitated, clearly surprised by her question. Then he let out a deep sigh. "Honestly, not really. I've had a rough day. There's a lot going on at home, and I've been trying to keep it together while dealing with customers who are frustrated over the smallest things. I know it's part of the job, but sometimes it gets overwhelming." Sarah nodded, her mind flashing back to her own frustrations in the past. How easy it had been to snap at someone for a small mistake or get irritated when things didn't go as planned. She had been that person before, too caught up in her own stress to stop and think about the bigger picture. "I get it," Sarah said, offering him a kind smile. "I've had my own days like that, and I know it's hard to keep going when everything feels like it's piling up. But just remember, you're doing your best, and that counts for a lot. We all have bad days, but it doesn't take away from the good we do in the world. You're making a difference, even if it doesn't always feel like it." James blinked, clearly surprised by her words. He gave her a small, grateful smile, his shoulders relaxing just a little. "Thanks, Sarah. I really needed to hear that. It's easy to forget sometimes." Sarah watched as he walked back to the kitchen, a little lighter than when he'd first approached her. She realized that the simple act of acknowledging someone's struggles could make a world of difference. She had learned that lesson from the Thompsons, recognizing the humanity in others, taking a moment to truly listen, and offering kindness when it was needed most. The rest of her meal was peaceful, and as she finished her tea, Sarah felt a sense of quiet fulfillment. It wasn't just about a job anymore. It was about the way she moved through the world. It was about how she made others feel, how she took the time to look beyond the surface and truly see the person in front of her. The next day at work, Sarah faced another situation that tested her newfound approach. During a flight from Miami to Chicago, a young woman sitting near the front had been visibly agitated. Her eyes were red from what looked like crying, and she kept looking at her phone, her fingers shaking as she typed and retyped messages. Sarah could sense that something wasn't right. Normally, she would have assumed the woman was just dealing with the typical stresses of air travel, but today Sarah couldn't help but wonder if there was something deeper going on. She approached the woman's seat, offering a soft smile. "Excuse me, miss. Is everything okay?" You seem a little upset. Is there anything I can do to help? The woman looked up, startled by the question. She quickly wiped her eyes and forced a smile, trying to hide the distress she was clearly feeling. Oh no, I'm fine. Just a long day, you know? But Sarah could tell it wasn't just a long day. There was something else, something behind the words. So she sat down next to the woman, keeping her tone gentle and understanding. I know air travel can be stressful, especially when you've got a lot on your mind. But you don't have to go through it alone. If you ever need to talk or just need a moment to yourself, I'm here. The woman seemed to hesitate for a moment. Then, as if the weight of the world had suddenly lifted from her shoulders, she broke down. I just got some bad news, she confessed, her voice trembling. I'm flying to Chicago to see my mom. She's been sick for a while, and I just found out she's not going to make it much longer. I'm terrified I won't get there in time. Sarah's heart went out to the young woman. She had been trained to handle all sorts of situations, from turbulence to medical emergencies. But this was different. This was real life, raw and painful. For a moment there was nothing to say. Words felt insufficient in the face of such sorrow. So, instead of offering empty platitudes or advice, Sarah simply placed a hand on the woman's arm, offering her the comfort of human connection. I'm so sorry, Sarah said softly. I can't imagine what you're going through, but you're not alone in this. We'll make sure you get there safely. And if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. The woman's tears slowed and she gave Sarah a weak but grateful smile. Thank you. You don't know how much this helps. Just having someone to talk to makes all the difference. As Sarah walked away, her heart ached for the woman, but she also felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had been given another chance to make a difference, to be there for someone when they needed it the most. And once again, it wasn't about the job. It was about being present, offering compassion and showing that even in the midst of someone else's struggle, they were still seen. It became clearer to Sarah with each passing day that the lessons she had learned from the Thompsons weren't just for the workplace. They were for life. The small moments, the ones that seemed insignificant, were the ones that truly mattered. It wasn't about perfection or always getting things right. It was about understanding, about treating everyone with the same dignity, whether they were in the seat next to her or across the room. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She was going to face it with empathy, with kindness, and with a heart that was open to the people around her. And for the first time, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. As Sarah continued her journey toward personal growth, she realized that the lessons she had learned on the plane and the encounters that had reshaped her understanding of human connection were starting to spill into every aspect of her life. There was a quiet confidence that came with this new perspective, a sense of purpose that made her see her daily tasks in a completely new light. She was no longer just moving through the motions. She was actively seeking to make a difference, one small act at a time. One evening, about a month after her interaction with the Thompsons, Sarah was sitting in her usual spot at the small cafe, sipping her tea and reading through a new flight schedule. As she perused the list, a familiar figure entered the cafe, Mrs. Thompson. Her presence immediately caught Sarah's attention. She hadn't seen her since that first heartfelt conversation, and as soon as she saw her, Sarah felt a rush of warmth. The Thompsons had remained in the back of her mind, a constant reminder of the profound lesson they had unknowingly taught her. Mrs. Thompson spotted her at the table, and with a smile, walked over. Well, if it isn't the most polite flight attendant I know, she said, her voice warm and teasing. Sarah laughed, feeling an immediate sense of gratitude. Mrs. Thompson, it's good to see you again. I didn't expect to run into you here. I come here often, Mrs. Thompson explained, taking a seat across from Sarah. It's one of my favorite places to relax after a long trip, and it looks like you're still keeping busy with your flights. Busy, yes, Sarah replied with a grin, but I'm learning that it's not just about getting through the day. I've really started to focus on how I interact with people. It's amazing how much a small act of kindness can change the way someone feels, and how much it can change me too. Mrs. Thompson nodded thoughtfully. That's the key, you know. Treating others with respect and kindness doesn't just benefit them. It's something that enriches you as well. The more you give, the more you receive, though not always in ways you might expect. I'm starting to understand that, Sarah admitted, looking down at her tea for a moment. After our conversation, I realized that I had been moving through life a bit too fast, focusing more on tasks and efficiency than on the people around me. It was like I had forgotten to see them as people, and instead saw them as just another part of my job. Mrs. Thompson's eyes softened as she listened. It happens to the best of us. Life moves quickly, and we can get so caught up in our own little worlds that we forget to pause and really listen to those around us. But when we do take that moment to see someone, to acknowledge them for who they are, it changes everything. Sarah nodded in agreement. I used to think my job was just about completing my tasks, serving drinks, making sure everything ran smoothly, and getting through the flight. But now, I see that every interaction is an opportunity to make someone feel seen, to offer a moment of kindness or connection. It's not just about serving, it's about being present. Mrs. Thompson leaned back in her chair, clearly pleased with Sarah's insight. I'm glad to hear that, Sarah. You've grown since that flight we were on together, haven't you? Sarah smiled sheepishly. I've had a few lessons along the way, that's for sure. They both laughed, and for a moment, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on just how much the past month had changed her. It wasn't just about professional growth anymore. She had gained a deeper understanding of herself and the people she encountered, and she had learned the importance of slowing down, of taking the time to connect on a human level. As they chatted, Mrs. Thompson shared some stories about her travels, her family, and her experiences as a shareholder in the airline industry. She spoke about the challenges she had faced in her business career, the triumphs and the failures, and how each experience had shaped her. Sarah listened intently, fascinated by the wisdom Mrs. Thompson had to offer. It was clear that she wasn't just a successful businesswoman. She was someone who had lived a life rich with experiences and had learned to navigate the complexities of people and relationships with grace. Life is all about balance, Mrs. Thompson said, her voice growing more reflective. You need to focus on your goals and ambitions, but you also have to make space for the people who matter, those you care about, those who care about you. Don't let the busyness of life make you forget what truly matters. Success isn't just about climbing to the top, it's about the journey and the people you meet along the way. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat as Mrs. Thompson spoke. She had heard this kind of advice before, but it had never hit her as deeply as it did now. She had been so focused on the destination, on achieving success in her career, that she had neglected the richness of the journey itself. She had neglected the people who were part of that journey, the ones who helped shape who she was. Mrs. Thompson continued, and don't be too hard on yourself when you make mistakes. We all do. It's how you move forward that matters most. Recognize where you went wrong, learn from it, and keep going. Life's not about perfection, it's about growth. I've learned that the hard way, Sarah said with a small smile, thinking back to the way she had treated the Thompsons that first day. I think I've learned a lot more in the past month than I have in a long time. Mrs. Thompson's smile was kind. That's the beauty of life, Sarah. We never stop learning, and the best part is, you can always make a positive impact on your own life and on others, no matter where you are on your journey. As they parted ways later that evening, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude for the chance encounter. Mrs. Thompson had become more than just a reminder of the mistakes she'd made on that flight. She had become a mentor, a guide, and a source of wisdom. Sarah knew she would carry the lessons she had learned from her with her for the rest of her life. Walking home that evening, Sarah reflected on how much she had grown. She thought about all the passengers she had met on her flights, the small moments of connection that had now become so important to her, and the way she had started seeing her job not just as a task, but as a chance to make a difference in the lives of others. She had been given a second chance, and now, every day felt like an opportunity to live more intentionally, with kindness, humility, and a deeper appreciation for the people around her. And as she looked ahead, she knew that no matter what came next, she was ready to embrace life with open arms and an open heart. As the weeks passed, Sarah continued to see her world through a new lens. Her perspective had fundamentally shifted, and she found herself walking through life with a sense of purpose that had once been absent. She had always been diligent in her work, but now she was motivated by something deeper than just completing tasks. It wasn't about moving through the motions anymore. It was about making meaningful connections, about leaving a positive impact on those she encountered, and about learning to truly be present. One morning, Sarah woke up to a rather unusual message, a note from her supervisor asking her to come in early for a quick meeting before her shift. She hadn't received a request like that before, and immediately, a sense of unease settled in her stomach. Her mind raced with possibilities. Had something gone wrong? Had another complaint been filed? She tried to push the thoughts away, but found herself pacing around her apartment as she got ready, the nerves not easing even as she put on her uniform. As she arrived at the office and stepped into the small meeting room, her supervisor, Linda, was already waiting for her. Linda had always been professional but warm, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a slight nervousness. The room felt small, the quiet hum of the air conditioning adding to the tension. Linda gestured for Sarah to sit down across from her, and Sarah, doing her best to hide her apprehension, took a seat. "Sarah, thank you for coming in early," Linda began, her tone steady but with a hint of something else, something Sarah couldn't quite place. "I wanted to talk to you about something that's come to our attention recently." Sarah's mind immediately went on high alert. Was this about the Thompsons? About her behavior on that flight? But before she could ask, Linda spoke again. "I've received feedback from a few of our passengers recently, and I want to be clear that this isn't about any formal complaints or issues with your performance. On the contrary, the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. We've had several passengers mention how much they appreciated your kindness, your attention to detail, and your overall demeanor." Sarah blinked, trying to process the unexpected praise. She had been prepared for a conversation about mistakes, about what she still needed to improve on. But this was something entirely different. "You've really made an impression on our passengers, Sarah," Linda continued. "And because of that, we wanted to offer you something special. We've been considering you for a senior flight attendant position, a role that would involve mentoring new crew members and taking on more responsibility during flights." The words took a moment to register. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had never imagined something like this happening, especially not so soon after the flight with the Thompsons. She had been focused on doing better, on changing the way she interacted with people. She hadn't expected it to lead to something like this. "I know this may come as a surprise," Linda said, noticing Sarah's wide-eyed expression, "but we've been really impressed by how much you've grown in such a short period of time. The way you've connected with passengers, the empathy you've shown, and the way you've taken responsibility for your actions. These qualities are exactly what we need in a senior flight attendant." Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. It wasn't just the recognition of her efforts, it was the chance to take on a new challenge, to step into a leadership role, to mentor others in the way she had learned to be better. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt like everything she had been working toward had come full circle. She had learned to embrace vulnerability, to admit her mistakes, and to grow from them, and now that very growth was being recognized. "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice a little shaky, but filled with sincerity. "I'm truly honored. I never expected this, especially after everything that happened. But I'm ready for the challenge. I want to help others the way I've learned to help myself." Linda smiled warmly, clearly pleased with Sarah's response. "We're confident you'll be a great fit. You've already shown a remarkable ability to connect with people, and that's exactly what our newer staff need to see. You're not just a flight attendant. You're someone who understands the bigger picture of what we do here. It's not about the service or the tasks. It's about how we make people feel. For a moment, Sarah felt like the room had faded away. All the lessons she had absorbed, all the moments of growth and self-reflection, had led her to this point. She had come so far from the person who had dismissed the Thompsons without a second thought. Now she was being entrusted with a responsibility that carried much more weight, the chance to guide others, to help them see the importance of empathy, and to be a mentor in the way that Mrs. Thompson had unknowingly mentored her. The meeting ended with a handshake and the promise of more details to come, but Sarah didn't need any more explanation. She was already envisioning the future, what she would teach, what she would learn, and how she would continue to evolve. She walked out of the office with a new sense of confidence, ready to take on the next step of her journey. As she made her way to the flight, the realization settled in that she wasn't just moving forward in her career. She was living the very lesson she had learned from that seemingly small, but life-altering moment with the Thompsons. She had taken ownership of her mistakes, used them to fuel her growth, and now, that growth was being recognized and rewarded. On the plane, as she walked down the aisle, Sarah found herself connecting with the passengers in a way she hadn't before. There was something different about how she moved through the cabin, something more intentional, more patient, more attuned to the needs of the people she was serving. It wasn't just about her job anymore. It was about understanding the significance of the interactions she had with others, no matter how fleeting. Later during the flight, as Sarah offered drinks to a family seated in the middle row, she noticed a young child who looked nervous and unsettled. Normally, she would have moved on quickly, but today, she paused. She knelt down beside the child, offering a friendly smile and a comforting word. "Everything okay, sweetie? You seem a little worried." The child nodded, her eyes wide, and Sarah could see the fear in her gaze. "I don't like flying," the little girl whispered. Sarah smiled softly and took a moment to reassure her, sharing a light-hearted story about her own experiences with flying when she was younger. The child's nervousness slowly melted away as Sarah continued to chat with her. By the time Sarah walked away, the little girl was happily drawing on the activity sheet she had handed her, her fear replaced with calm. It was another small moment, but it meant the world to Sarah. She had learned from the Thompsons, from her own mistakes, and from the journey she had taken to get here. It was all about the connections, the moments of kindness, and the willingness to be present in the lives of others. This wasn't just a career for Sarah anymore. It was her life's work, her calling, and she was finally ready to embrace it, fully and completely. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah found herself stepping into her new role as senior flight attendant with a sense of pride and purpose she hadn't felt before. It wasn't just the title or the added responsibilities that made her feel fulfilled. It was the opportunity to share the lessons she had learned, to mentor others, and to be the kind of leader she had always admired. She had come a long way from the flight where she had made that critical mistake with the Thompsons, and now she was using everything she had learned to help her fellow crew members grow. Her first day in the new role was both exciting and daunting. She was nervous about how her team would perceive her. Would they see her as someone who had only recently learned the ropes? Would they question her ability to lead? But as soon as she stepped onto the plane, ready to begin the flight, she realized something important. Leadership wasn't about being perfect. It was about being human. It was about showing up with authenticity, being willing to admit when you didn't have all the answers, and offering support and guidance when needed. She didn't need to be the perfect leader. She just needed to be a present one. During the flight, Sarah took the time to check in with her fellow crew members, especially the newer attendants. She saw how they struggled with certain aspects of the job, like managing a high-stress environment or handling difficult passengers. Instead of giving orders or simply telling them what to do, she offered a listening ear and shared her own experiences. "I know it feels overwhelming at first," she'd say, "but you get better with each flight. Don't be afraid to ask for help, and remember, we're all in this together." It wasn't about showing how much she knew. It was about creating an environment where her team felt supported, valued, and encouraged to grow. She made it a point to praise her crew for their efforts, even for the smallest things. A calm attitude in the face of a difficult passenger, a quick response during a medical emergency. Sarah recognized every effort, big or small. She knew that when people felt appreciated, they were more likely to rise to the occasion and perform their best. One afternoon, about a month into her new role, Sarah received a message from Mrs. Thompson. It had been some time since they'd last spoken, but Sarah never forgot the kindness and wisdom Mrs. Thompson had shown her. The message was short, but it left Sarah with a warmth in her heart. "Sarah, I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I'm so proud of the progress you've made. You've always had it in you. You just had to believe in yourself. Keep shining. And remember, kindness is the true measure of success." The message brought a smile to Sarah's face, but it also made her reflect on how far she had come. Mrs. Thompson's words had stuck with her in a way she hadn't fully understood at the time, but now they resonated deeper than ever. It wasn't about accolades or promotions. It was about becoming the person she was meant to be, the kind of person who made others feel seen, valued, and respected. And in doing so, she had found her own sense of fulfillment. Sarah spent the next few days thinking about how far she had come. She was no longer the same person who had brushed off the Thompsons without a second thought. She had grown into someone who understood the importance of connection, humility, and empathy. Her role as a senior flight attendant wasn't just about guiding others professionally. It was about leading by example, showing her team what it meant to be human, to be real, and to approach their work with heart. Every flight, every interaction with a passenger or crew member was a chance to practice these values. Sarah was no longer just going through the motions of her job. She was living it. She knew that her job wasn't just about the destination. It was about the journey and the relationships she built along the way. One evening, as Sarah was preparing for another flight, she stood by the gate waiting for passengers to board. She caught sight of an elderly couple walking down the jetway toward the plane. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, time seemed to slow down. It was Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. They had no idea she would be on the flight, but they recognized her immediately as they approached. Mrs. Thompson's eyes lit up as she smiled warmly. "Sarah, I didn't expect to see you here. How have you been?" "I've been great, Mrs. Thompson," Sarah replied with a genuine smile. "Actually, I've been promoted to senior flight attendant recently, and I just wanted to thank you again. Your wisdom, your kindness, it's been a big part of my journey." Mrs. Thompson looked at her with pride. "I knew you had it in you. You always did, Sarah. You just had to take the time to see it yourself." As the Thompsons settled into their seats, Sarah couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude. They had unknowingly guided her to where she was today. It wasn't just the lessons they had shared. It was their ability to treat everyone with respect, with understanding, that had shaped Sarah into the person she was becoming. As the plane took off, Sarah moved through the aisles with a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just a job. It was a calling. And with each flight, she knew she was becoming the leader she had always wanted to be. It wasn't about the title. It was about how she made people feel, how she helped them grow, and how she carried the lessons of humility, kindness, and compassion into everything she did. The months that followed were a blur of challenges, growth, and successes. Sarah settled into her role as a senior flight attendant, with confidence and humility, finding fulfillment in the relationship she built with her crew and passengers. She was no longer just the person behind the drink cart. She was the one who held the space for her team, offering guidance when needed, and encouragement when things got tough. Every flight was an opportunity to make a difference, and Sarah took that responsibility to heart. As she continued to mentor new flight attendants, she saw the same potential in them that Mrs. Thompson had seen in her. Many of them were nervous, unsure of themselves, and hesitant to take on leadership roles. But Sarah knew that with time, they would grow into confident professionals, just as she had. She worked with them patiently, offering advice, sharing stories of her own struggles, and showing them the importance of treating passengers and co-workers with respect. It wasn't always easy. There were difficult passengers, unexpected delays, and moments of high tension. But through it all, Sarah remained calm, always remembering the lessons she had learned. She knew that how she responded to those challenges would set the tone for her team, and so she took a deep breath, focused on the people in front of her, and did her best to lead with kindness and understanding. One day Sarah found herself reflecting on her journey during a quiet moment between flights. She thought back to that pivotal day when she had dismissed the Thompsons and how that moment had changed everything. She had learned so much from them, from her own mistakes, and from the people who had been kind enough to show her the way. It was humbling to realize just how far she had come and how much more she had yet to learn. The lesson was simple but profound. Respect everyone, treat everyone with kindness, and never forget that we're all just people, doing our best in a world that can sometimes feel overwhelming. And as Sarah stood at the front of the plane, ready to greet the next batch of passengers, she smiled to herself. She was no longer the same person who had made that rash decision on a flight all those months ago. She had grown, learned, and evolved, but most importantly, she had found her purpose, not in the accolades, but in the small, everyday moments that made life truly meaningful. For Sarah, the journey had only just begun, and as she moved forward, she knew she would carry these lessons with her, leading with empathy, humility, and a heart full of gratitude. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more amazing stories like this.